Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Andrea Cruz Floren. We're talking about her debut picture book, In the Groves, a book she both wrote and beautifully illustrated. This book is a whirlwind adventure about cultural belonging and is inspired by Andrea's own grandfather and his orange groves. In it, Clara finds magic, fun, and excitement in her cultural heritage while visiting her grandparents. I can't wait to talk about this beautiful book, both in words and pictures. So let's get right to it. Andrea, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it. I'm so excited to talk about my book, and I still get a little, lump in my throat whenever someone mentions my grandfather. So
Yes, I know. We'll get there when we talk about the book, but this really is a love letter to your family, I feel. It's beautiful.
it is. It is definitely a love letter to my family, and it's been fun because they didn't see a whole lot of it before it came out. My mother did, but the extended family didn't, so it's been really fun for them to receive it and find all the little Easter eggs for the family that I tucked inside of the book.
Ooh, oh, that sounds fun. We definitely have to put a pin in that one for later. I want to know more about that. Okay. So why don't we start with a little bit of background? It is your first picture book, and so you might be new to listeners who are listening to the podcast. I know that your picture book may be new, but storytelling, it seems, is not. That is something that is part of your life and part of your work. And so I'd love if you could tell listeners a bit about you and your work and what led you to children's literature.
Okay. So it started when I was 4 or 5, and I used to make my own picture books, um, and I still have some of those tucked away in a Tupperware somewhere, and then I think, you grow and you kind of reach a point in your life where you decide maybe you're not so good at things, and that usually comes around 3rd or 4th grade, which I always find very sad. You decide you're not a good artist or not a good storyteller, and your life goes different directions.
Yeah.
Um, and then I spent over 20 years in the design and advertising world, which I kind of think of as storytelling in its own way. Um, I worked in, TV commercials and print advertisements and products and service design. And all of those to me are stories in their own way. Of course, they're not my own stories, but um, I think while I did that, it allowed me to still be creative, to still think of ideas. And then I kind of reached a point after I had my two boys, um, where I no longer wanted to be in a design studio till 2 in the morning. I couldn't be anymore. And I just started falling back in love with kids' books after reading with them and starting to wonder, I wonder if I could give that a try. And then I think I just reconnected with my childhood love of books. I grew up in the bookmobile, which we lived outside of the city, so the bookmobile would park in the back of our acre, and I would spend hours there poring over books, and it was just fun to kind of rediscover that love inside of myself. And I had a good friend who's still my mentor who had kind of made the same transition, and I saw her become an author illustrator and kind of find herself. And so I just followed along and and she was my mentor for this book, and hopefully it's the first of many more to come.
Ah, I love that. You found that little girl. Again, it sounds like the one who loved this in the beginning and who strayed from it, but kept holding on to it a little bit. And I love that it was your kids and your own reacquaintance with children's literature that kind of lit that dream back up for you.
Yeah, I think I realized there's a lot of stories that I needed to tell for myself, and stories I eventually want to tell for what I feels missing for my kids and other kids. And yeah, it's fun to be that little girl again.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a part as you talk about that little girl and the stories that you still want to tell. I've got to say that I absolutely adore this one paragraph on your website. I always stalk my authors before onto the podcast, and I wanted to ask permission to read it because I think this one paragraph could introduce listeners to you in a way that instantly shows them what you're all about, what this book has inside these amazing pages, and maybe the books to come. Is it okay if I read a paragraph from your website?
Sure, now I'm curious. I'm like, what is
Oh,
this paragraph?
it's so good. It's so good. It is when you are introducing yourself to visitors. And so before we, get to talking about in the groves, I think this would set it up so perfectly. So here we go. Her worlds are filled with vibrant colors, quirky characters, unapologetic misfits, and curious observers. Stories of wonder, mischief, warmth, joy, and whimsy capture her heart. Themes of belonging, resilience, interconnectedness, family, ancestral lore, and everyday magic speak to her soul. It is a best paragraph, Andrea.
Like, that's it. That's what I love.
Yes, yes, and just hearing you talk, I can now feel the excitement behind that paragraph even more that you allowed yourself to reconnect with that part of you in the past and now, just pay it forward to so many adults and children who are going to read this picture book. Oh, I love it.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this beautiful picture book, In the Groves, both written and illustrated by you. So I'm so glad I get to pick your brain about both of those things today and figure out how you managed to put it together so beautifully. Could you give us a little backstory on the inspiration behind this book and a little summary of what it's about for listeners who might be unfamiliar with it yet?
Sure. Let's see. So the inspiration, I grew up in South Dakota, very far from my Mexican American family. My mom was the one who moved away, and everybody lived in California. So my grandfather worked in the orange groves, and we would come out to see my family at least once a summer. My parents, they didn't have a lot of means, but they would save up and somehow get us out to California, because they wanted us to have a big connection with everyone. But whenever we came, since we were kind of the visitors, they would take us to do all the touristy things and the fun things. And yet my family had all these stories from my mom to my young cousins about the days that they would go spend at the groves and the adventures they would have. And for me, I was always wishing that I could go there too, instead of, the beach was great, and Disneyland is fun, but in my mind, the Grove sounded like a pretty magical place, and I never did get to go. And my grandfather passed, and he was also just somebody who loomed very large in my life. He lived his life. This job was a hard labor job, a lot of hard work, a lot of time in the sun, and he was just the most joyful, tender, strong-hearted person that I've ever known.
Oh,
And I just wanted to honor him and his work and make a story that um, celebrated our family and our culture, and just um, people who kind of come from these backgrounds that maybe don't always get celebrated and highlighted.
Mhm.
And it was a chance to redeem myself and make a story about what would have happened if I went to the Groves.
Yeah, and now as someone who has read that, I can I don't like to give spoilers on the podcast, but there is there's some fun, as you said, and or as I said in the beginning, there's whimsy, there's a little bit of magic, and now I can totally understand where that comes from and your desire to be there and imagine what that would be like. Mm.
And I think oftentimes in kids' minds, it's sometimes those more everyday and mundane things that to them feel very magical.
Yes, that is so true, right? I think that's hard. It's easier for us to forget that as adults, but it's those little things that matter. It's like, the cardboard box after the birthday instead of the toy inside, right? It's those things
Mhm,
that really matter.
mhm,
Mm.
mhm,
So in the story, you have this beautiful big family. You have these beautiful big groves, and you have this day where she does get to spend the day with her grandfather and sing and eat and just be together, to talk, to learn. I really loved getting a chance from the first page to the last to not just meet the whole family, but really just live that one special day. It
mhm.
was just such a beautiful, as I said, a beautiful love letter to your grandfather, to the Groves, to your family. And I'm curious on the writing side, how did you decide how to structure this book and to do it in this way where you do lay out such a beautiful magical day? I imagine that was hard to whittle down everything you felt and feel and appreciate and love into, one book. And so I'm just curious of how you approached that as a writer to put something so beautiful and personal on the page.
I think with a really good editor who is very patient with me. So I feel like I have to shout out Elizabeth Lee, who's also an author herself, but she saw the heart of the story. And you're right, I did a lot of my own research and interviewing families and family members, and there is a lot there. And I can be a talky person, so it's hard to whittle it down. But thank goodness for editors and their persistence to make you revise and revise and revise. And revise. But I really think I have to credit her. And I think just being open to trusting that relationship and knowing that in the end I'm gonna have to let go of a few things. Hopefully that the heart of what I wanted to express still comes through.
Well, as a reader, I have to imagine that it did because I felt the love. I felt the emotion on the page. And the the piece that I love was kind of this I love symmetry. I love when things kind of make sense and have a pattern. And I love how you open up, at least pretty close to the opening page, with this big, beautiful family table where everyone has something to say. And while I won't say how it ends, it does end with another family table scene that's a little bit different this time.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to tell you how much I loved that as a reader. I could just see the whole full circle nature of it, not to mention that the illustrations of those pages are some of my favorites too. It's something as a reader, I thought, "Oh, I just love this." I could just feel it. I could feel the love on the page. So well done getting me very emotional.
Thank you. I mean, I also have to credit my family because as I was drawing these characters, first I thought, first of all, the family's even bigger than this, but I had to pare it down somehow.
Right.
And I thought, why did I pick so many characters for my debut to have to draw over and over again? But I really thought about their personalities in each little person as I drew them. So I feel like they're kind of alive in these little
Yeah.
characters. And yeah, it was fun to think of it that way.
Now the book has elements, it's written in English, but it does have Spanish. And I know there is a Spanish version of the book as well, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I loved that. I haven't read the Spanish version, but I loved being able to really sink into the language throughout the story and really feel it. And I wanted to mention too to listeners, there is a glossary in the back as well. Um, it just adds so much to the story to be able to, if not hear, to hear it in your own head, right? The beauty of that language and how it impacts the story.
Mhm. And I really, for me, it was really important to write it the way my grandparents speak to me or spoke to me.
Mhm.
And I just kind of tried to embody a lifetime of phrases and things and ways that spoke to me. That felt really important to bring in this story. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish in the home, um, but we had what I consider Spanglish. There was a lot of Spanglish, and so it felt important to me that this book kind of reflect that part of my experience.
Yeah. Now, shifting a little bit to the illustrations. I'm so glad I get to ask you about both things today. I have to say, one of the things that I loved, and sometimes this happens in picture books and sometimes it doesn't, but I love when I can look at the outer sleeve of the book and see a beautiful cover. But then when I take the outer sleeve off, I see a different cover with a little bit more of the book. I've got to tell you, when I took the cover off and saw, and I guess I can say this because it's not, well, maybe I won't. I will let listeners figure out what the difference is, but I just can't tell you how much that little thing makes me happy. So I got, the character on the front and the groves, and then to just turn the page and see, or not turn the page, to take the sleeve off and see the front, and then to flip it over and to see the 2-page spread with the back. I just had to say that made my day. So thank you.
I love whimsy.
Yes,
Any
I
place I
do
can
too.
put
Now,
it.
how do you go about both illustrating and writing? So now I know the story essentially came first because it is based on your life experiences and the story you want to tell. But when it comes to the actual putting together of the book, I'm curious, do you start with words and then you sketch? Did you have some sketches and then go back to the words? Is it all mixed together? I would love to know what that process looks like for you.
Hmm. I think it's one that I'm still kind of figuring out and trying a little bit differently each time I'm working on a different story. Um, so for Groves, when my agent and I were packaging it together, it did initially start as just a manuscript, and I just really wrote it and revised it and honed it. And then I went and started to do the sketches, and we had a full dummy when we took it out on submission. Um, and then it went through more revisions and more sketches. And for a
Mhm.
while, I think we even put those sketches away and just went back to the manuscript. So it had quite a journey. um, but looking back, I think that really helped me kind of hone those characters. So once I was working with Penguin and we had the manuscript in a good place, I got to go back and really focus on the sketches and tighten up the characters and just really spend time bringing those to life and then putting it back together. So I think the Groves kind of happened that way. Um, the story, I tend to start with words. I'm trying to push myself and see if I can uh, do more sketching up front. I know a lot of author illustrators sometimes tend to sketch first and the story comes out of that. It just seems, I don't know, I can't quite bring myself to do that yet. I we'll see, we'll see. But the Groves was definitely story first and then lots and lots of sketching and then kind of marrying the two back together.
Yeah. So when you are ready for the sketching, when you're ready for the actual illustrations, are you a pencil, colored pencil, marker, paint, watercolor, oil kind of illustrator, or do you go straight for the digital tools?
When I'm sketching, I am all traditional, just pencils. And um, I feel like I really need to feel the characters that way. So all of the sketches are done in really tight pencils. And then from there, I kind of get a little messy because these illustrations are a little bit of a mix of everything, which is kind of, I've realized, is maybe a parallel to myself. There's some gouache, there's some colored pencil, there's like scanned textures, and then there's digital pieces, and somehow it all comes together and
Yeah.
makes an illustration. So, um, yeah, but I think it's important for me to have those tight pencils first and really feel like I know the characters before I start introducing in digital parts and color and all the things.
I'm so glad you mentioned all of those parts because that definitely jumped out at me as a reader who was enjoying these illustrations immensely. You have, some pages that are, let's see, the one page that I loved. Well, I love so many of them, Andrea, but the one that really jumped out to me is I loved your use of color. I loved the color palette on those end papers. It just had this beautiful warmth and this beautiful kind of calming feeling on me. And then when you go through the book, you have these bright colors. As you mentioned, there are lots of different patterns, lots of ways those colors look and appear on the page. But I love how you played with the color on this one spread where they're in the groves and they are eating. And she asked him, what was it like when you came to California? And those memories flash back and they are in more muted colors. And I just loved that. I love your use of color, the brightness, the contrast of it. It's just gorgeous. It really is gorgeous. And I'm so glad there are lots of different pieces of you, which make you use lots of different pieces of illustration because it's gorgeous.
Thank you so much. It's like I love color, so it's hard to restrain myself sometimes, but I think those memories had to feel like, you know, more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Um, I don't want to say silent film, but just more of like a memory. So they needed to be a little more subdued.
Yeah. Yeah. I really do love the colors that you've chosen here. And I really don't have a single favorite page. I love the table element, as I already talked about. But I guess if you made me pick one where I really had to pick a favorite page, it was towards the end, and it was the double page spread without words and just the magical scene of what is happening in the groves. And I won't say much more because I want listeners to figure out that page and then they'll know when they turn the page and realize that was it. But oh, it just warmed my heart. It was gorgeous.
I think one thing I'm enjoying is as I've been able to read it to kids, I thought, are they gonna realize this is kind of a magical tall tale, and they don't even question it. They're just like, of course
Yeah.
that's what happens. It's been
Andrea,
so
I
fun
didn't
to kind of
question it
see that.
either. I didn't question it. I was completely here for it.
Good.
Now, you mentioned earlier, that your family members might see some Easter eggs in the book. Is there one that you might be able to tell us about? Because I find that fascinating.
Oh goodness. There is so many, and it's been so fun to have them find them. So, uh, I mean, the opening page where the family is all coming to the grandparents' house. If you were to see a picture of my grandmother's house, it pretty much looks just like that. And she actually has a pet turtle she's had for, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many decades. And so there's a turtle on that page for
Yep.
my grandmother. And then in the family tree, there's so many little Easter eggs throughout, but there's a family tree and a couple points. And a lot of the names there are inspired from family and friends. Of course, I couldn't put everybody in there, but it's been kind of fun to have those little nods to people. The plaid shirt that my grandfather is wearing in the Grove. So when he passed, my grandmother made us all these beautiful little kind of tiny quilts, I guess you could call them, like table centered quilty things. And they're all made of his work shirts. So I worked one of his patterns into the abuelo that's in this book. And and same with the handkerchief. I have that exact handkerchief that I drew in this book. So there's just little nods to the family throughout the whole book.
What an amazing gift that was. Wow. Oh, it makes knowing those things makes flipping through the pages of your book, like I am doing again right now, just that much more special and magical, knowing that about what I'm seeing at the page, and knowing, even if I don't know what they are, knowing that are those beautiful Easter eggs for your family to find. Ah, it just makes the book that much more powerful. Wow.
And I guess I would add that all of the photos on the end pages were all pretty much from family photos that I kind of reconstructed in my own way. So
Really? Oh, wow.
yeah.
Oh, I love this. This truly is I was dead on when I said love letter, because it really is a love letter. Oh.
It is.
Well, I've loved chatting with you about this book, but I am curious if you are working on other picture books or other books that we might be able to get our hands on in the future. You're able to give us any sneak peeks or little teasers?
Yes, kind of. So I am working on a second book with the same editor, which I'm so excited about because this project was such a just such a warm, lovely relationship between the two of us. So I'm excited that I get to work on a second book with her. I can't say what it's about yet, but it will probably involve a pretty feisty protagonist. And behind that book is a lot of others. I'm someone who tends to have a lot of ideas and I just need a lot more time.
Yeah. Yeah. Time is the thing that gets in our way, isn't it?
Mhm. You know, if only.
Yeah.
So hopefully that book will be, it won't be out in 2025, but we'll see. We'll see if we can get to 2026.
Patient. That's okay. We are patient. I want to leave listeners with the last line of the author's note that comes in the back. I mentioned that you have a glossary on that last page. You also have some information about your story and where it came from. And the last line is one that I ended up writing on a sticky note. I write a lot of quotes on sticky notes, but this is on a sticky note and it's in my office. And I think it's a perfect way to end the episode. And it also is such a perfect representation of you saying you have so many stories, you just don't have enough time. And those last words are this: keep your family stories alive. Right. And this book may be a love letter to your family, but I can imagine that it is going to inspire readers to think about their own and to celebrate them right alongside how you did here. And I think that's such a beautiful next step that could come from reading this book.
Thank you. I sure hope so. I think um, a little kind of side message to that I was hoping with this book is um, a lot of times for marginalized communities, oral storytelling is such an important part of the culture, and that tends to get lost over time. Um, and so, a part of telling this story was, you know, my grandfather was a wonderful storyteller, and a lot of our family's histories from Mexico is kind of kept alive through oral storytelling and through tall tales and through things that you don't know, you know, what's true, what's not, and there's kind of a myth and a legend and a magic to it. And I just hope that that inspires people who might have a similar experience, to keep those stories alive because they're important. They're our histories.
Yeah. And I have no doubt that your book will do that. It just evokes such wonderful emotions and feelings. And I feel like that's just a natural next step when you close that last page and just bask in that glow for a little bit. Your book, it's beautiful.
Like, oh, thank you so much.
Welcome. So welcome. Where can listeners find more about you? If they'd like to stay in touch, maybe a website or social media handles, anything that you'd like to share?
Sure. So my website is, this will always be a fun spelling test for people.
I know,
It
I
is,
love this. I love, love, love your website address.
it's quietlyfiery.com. And my Instagram handle is the same. So you have to know how to spell quietly and fiery. And those are probably the places I show up the most. Um, yeah.
Oh, I loved the name. I did have to, spell it and spell check to make sure I'm typing the right one because I was typing it so quickly. I'll be sure to put those links into the show notes as well as links to this beautiful picture book so that listeners can just quickly click and either find the book or find you to stay in touch.
Thank you. This has been such a pleasure talking to you and letting me share a bit more about the book. I really appreciate it.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I love talking books all the time, but I especially love when it is a debut book and I can be part of the launch and putting it out into the world. So it's me that is very grateful and thank you. And I'm excited for you and I hope you enjoy every minute of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.